Good morning, everyone. Everybody, Cyclone Alfred remains a Category 2, continues to make its way towards the coast, and the latest satellite imagery shows it's expected to cross the Bay Islands somewhere into the early hours of Saturday morning. It will be crossing the coast. I can announce that from now the Bureau of Meteorology will be going to hourly updates, and that'll be a great way of sharing that track with Queenslanders, and we'll continue to update you regularly about what that impact means, as well as a reflection on what's occurred. I've spoken about the four challenges: the waves, the winds, the rain and the flooding. Queenslanders will experience different impacts from that at different times, and it's important that we continue to share this update in a timely fashion to enable people to do so. We can do this calmly and clearly because we've done that preparation, and therefore we can respond swiftly as well. And so far, the way that Queenslanders have prepared has given us the best opportunity not just to deal with the event, but to be able to switch from response to recovery. And that's a really key part of it during the disaster event. Just some overnight observations. We've seen some wind gusts between 100 and 115 kilometres from Moreton Island through to Cape Byron. That is expected to increase in the hours ahead. As the system moves towards the coast, some of those increased winds will be felt indeed to Brisbane and to the north, but obviously those islands will be the first that continue to experience that. You've obviously seen images in overnight and in recent hours of fallen trees and the impact that's had on homes and cars. We do expect to see that continuing, and that has obviously made a big impact on the ability to provide electricity supply. Peter will be updating you shortly from from Energex, but that is important that we keep you updated on that. Regarding the storm tide flooding, which we've spoken about as one of those major challenges on the flooding front, the fact that the cyclone slowed before it crossed the coast, and it didn't cross during this morning's high tide, was particularly good news for that storm surge from the tide. We've this morning convened a meeting, and we had representatives from all of the local governments, but including Gold Coast and Redlands, and we've got no reports this morning of storm tide inundation. That is really, really good news. It truly is. Now, there's another high tide this afternoon and a slightly larger one tomorrow morning, a slightly larger one than this afternoon. So we'll continue to watch that as the system approaches. But particularly good news, there was no inundation overnight. There were, however, some major waves, and we continue to see waves north of 10 metres off the coast. And indeed, some of the erosion that we've seen at Main Beach, there's some incredible images that have come through this morning, and it does show you the force in which those waves hit the coast. Turning to rainfall, some significant totals over the last 24 hours. 165 mils at Lower Springbrook, and these totals are to 9 a.m. in fact. We've only received them in the last couple of hours. 153 mils at Currumbin Creek, 102 mils at Nerang, 136 millimetres at Coolangatta, and 134 millimetres at Binnaburra. We are expecting some significant rainfall in the next 24 to 48 hours right across that system, and maybe even beyond. I really want to address that, and I want to address the significance of the potential for flooding. This system remains a very broad one, and often when we see tropical cyclones as they approach the coast, that band really does tighten. In this case, it is really large and slow moving, and that does represent the prospect of some significant rainfall over a long period of time, and that rainfall does bring the risk of river and creek flooding, but Queenslanders know how to deal with that, and that has been proven time and time again, and I have seen an incredible level of preparation. The way that people have responded, the way that they have done the little things around their property, we have seen people heed the advice about stocking up supplies. I really do have every confidence that whatever the rainfall challenges come upon us, that Queenslanders will be able to handle that across a really big section of the coast, and a heavily populated one at that. The flood watch across the impacted zone, we could see minor to major flooding, and the Bureau will update that. Okay, I just want to talk to a couple of our priority areas at the moment, and I'll start with power outages. Peter will update you shortly from Energex, but there are large parts of the population in the southeast without power, particularly some of those islands and indeed in the Gold Coast area. The moment it is safe to do so, those crews will be hooking into action to reconnect. We understand how important having electricity is at all times, but particularly after a disaster. When you're cleaning up and you need a good night's sleep, we understand that. 1,200 staff have been pre-positioned, and there are 800 Ergon staff at the other end of the state who are ready to return the favour to their mates down here from what we saw a few weeks ago. So all the preparation has been done, and I can assure Queenslanders the moment it is safe to do so, they will be on the ground reconnecting power to homes. And we'll keep updating you about the loss of power and as it's coming back on. We've had a couple of questions about water. There are 34 different water treatment plants in that area. All of them have been assessed and many of them have been fortified. And by that I mean all of the backup provisions, things like the possibility of needing power generation. We've done a full analysis about potential impacts on them. So we are in as best a position as possible to handle that, and I'm very confident in the ability to meet the water supply in the short and the long term. Telecommunications will be a challenge, of course. It always is in an event. As part of our regular meetings, we do have representatives from the telcos there. Now, they have pre-positioned generators as well, following our discussions earlier in the week, and they will do everything they can to try to make sure that as the backup generation does come offline, that can be reconnected. What we'll do, having done the work in working with them to make sure that was in place, our role will be to make sure that we work with councils to door knock in those areas. If we need to get messages out to a part of the community that isn't covered by telecommunications, if those systems do go down, we will have people going door to door to deliver a message. Now, as we speak, we're assured that those things are still in place, but we'll update Queenslanders as it comes, and if that is needed, we will ramp into gear. There are 28 refuge centres that have been advertised and are online, and we're very grateful to the local governments for doing that. They are there as a last resort for people who need it, but they are there, and we ask Queenslanders to stay up to date, have an evacuation plan, but overwhelmingly we have seen the way that local government has prepared that. We're very grateful. If you want information on that, disaster.qld.gov.au, so that's the disaster website, disaster.qld.gov.au. All of the local government's dashboards are there. They also have all the mapping for floods, and we thank them very much for it. Turning to aged care, there has been some preemptive reallocation of some residents, but overall there's no reported evacuations of aged care. We have assessed all of those potential vulnerable residents. There are plans in place if they are required to be relocated. Our preference always is to try to care for them on site, but all those plans have been put in place, and we continue to update those residents and you on that. Hospitals. Virtual healthcare services, which are available 24/7, have been stepped up. Whilst we aren't having elective surgeries at the moment, those emergency departments are there, and they are there for people who need help in an emergency. There's even the ability for some of those health staff to be accommodated there if required, to make sure that we can keep those key medical facilities open, and we are very grateful for the fact that health service providers would be willing to do that and come into work at a time when they also have friends and family that they would love to be with as well. So we're deeply grateful for that. Public transport will continue to be closed today, so we will announce that all public transport will be closed tomorrow from Noosa to the border. And as we do with schools, we will make the announcement the day before to give people the opportunity to be able to plan, but we'll also continue to make sure that we, wherever it's possible, to be able to bring things back on we obviously will. Now, we are expecting some serious rainfall, as I've outlined, but we'll be back multiple times, and we'll continue to give people as much notice as we can in that. Supermarkets, they are operating on a case-by-case basis. That is their decision, and we're continuing to give them the information, and there are some that remain open. Their challenge will be balancing being able to get their staff there and make sure that they have things like power and they manage their impacts. As we continue to say, we are most grateful for people who are working in those frontline roles at a time that we desperately need it. And we will continue to work with the supermarkets to stay open for as long as they can and then get back on their feet as quickly as they can. And we are most keen to ensure that life can go back to normal after the event, and they are a key part of it. Turning to schools, there are 1,049 schools that are closed today in the impact zone. 2,081 early childhood centres are closed. We will be making an announcement on Monday, the day before, on Sunday, to give people the opportunity to plan, and most importantly to ensure that we don't do it in the morning and cause confusion. So it'll be the day before, and that will apply to Sunday as well. A couple of messages. Firstly, one of gratitude to every person who has worked around the clock to prepare and give us the best response to be able to deal with things in a calm and measured way, but also in a swift way. Thank you very much for whatever agency you are. To Queenslanders, I know this is an unusual event. It's been a long time since a cyclone crossed the coast this far south, but the way that people have treated this has been, quite frankly, remarkable. The vast majority of people have done the right thing. And my view is if you give people the information, humans rally in times of crisis, and people really, really have. My message to the people at the other end of the state, thanks for your good wishes. You went through a pretty big event within the last month, and yet you've been reaching out to your fellow Queenslanders. Your recovery continues in earnest, and we'll make sure that job is done and done properly. And finally, in events like this, there are always little moments of magic, and overnight, a set of twins were born on Dunwich Island, and on Dunwich, on the island. And we had paramedics and midwives who assisted the mum, and they continued to care for her, and that's one of those little gems in an otherwise really, really stressful time for everybody. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Premier, and good morning. Tropical Cyclone Alfred remains a Category 2 system and is currently 160 kilometres east of Brisbane. Although the movement has been erratic, it continues to track at around 7 kilometres per hour towards the southeast Queensland coast. The track for Tropical Cyclone Alfred is still expected to approach the Bay Islands after midnight Friday and into the early hours of Saturday, then move across Moreton Bay during Saturday morning and to the north of the Brisbane CBD. It's important to note that the exact track is still uncertain and that tropical cyclone warnings will now be updated every hour based on the latest radar and satellite imagery. A tropical cyclone warning remains in place from Double Island Point right through to the Queensland-New South Wales border. And coastal hazards for large waves of abnormally high tides remain in place, as well as severe weather warnings for intense rainfall and those damaging winds. I'll just unpack a few of the impacts we expect with Tropical Cyclone Alfred. Firstly, to the wind impacts. Damaging wind gusts, as the Premier mentioned, are being observed already, right through from Moreton Island to the south of the border. These damaging winds are expected to continue and increase as we move through the day today, including to the Brisbane area as Tropical Cyclone Alfred approaches tonight and into Saturday morning. The destructive wind gusts up to 150 kilometres per hour are possible about the exposed island coasts and coastal locations near and to the south of the system. So that extends down through Moreton, Stradbroke and those Gold Coast, exposed coasts of the Gold Coast. And that is particularly as the system approaches the coast. Now, as the cyclone moves across Moreton Bay Islands, it is expected to weaken from a Category 2 to a Category 1 system. This will mean that destructive winds are unlikely for Brisbane itself, but damaging wind gusts to 120 kilometres per hour are expected, and they will develop quickly as the system approaches. In terms of the waves and tides, we have seen extreme wave heights observed across the Queensland, southeast Queensland coast. And as the Premier mentioned, observations of over 10 metres. We expect these conditions to continue as the system approaches. And we have seen extreme coastal erosion and inundation of some areas. A coastal hazard warning for damaging surf and abnormally high tides remains in place from south of Sandy Cape. Tropical Cyclone Alfred has already produced storm surge values up to about 0.7 of a metre, with the extreme erosion we've seen around the Gold Coast due to that wave action. The storm tide risk remains, however, there is a reduced risk of the higher possible values. I spoke yesterday of the potential to see values over a metre above the normal highest astronomical tide. Our current modelling suggests that with the high tides we may see values of up to a half a metre above that highest normal tide, increasing to about 0.7 of a metre possible around the southern Moreton Bay and Redlands area. In terms of the rainfall, we've already seen totals of 100 to 150 and some values just reaching over that in the last hour or so, in the last 24 hours. This is expected to increase, so Tropical Cyclone Alfred is expected to produce that heavy to intense rainfall with widespread daily totals of 300 to 500 millimetres, and again, particularly around the southern flank of the system and the elevated terrain as it interacts with the cyclone moving across. That means we may see 800 millimetre totals for this event as it stretches through the next 48 hours or so. In terms of the flooding, those rainfall amounts we're seeing will be the major concern as we move forward. The flash flooding due to those intense rainfall, as well as widespread minor to major riverine flooding. Flood watches remain in place for the Mary River, the creeks and rivers of the Sunshine Coast, the Pine and Caboolture rivers, the Gold Coast rivers and creeks, the upper and lower Brisbane river catchments, the Condamine, McIntyre, and now also the Weir River. A major flood warning has been issued for the Logan and Albert rivers, and we are expecting moderate to major flooding possible from later today, and we're already starting to see rises on some of the gauges around Bow Desert. So in summary, Tropical Cyclone Alfred remains a Category 2 system. It is moving towards the southeast Queensland coast and expected across the Bay Islands in the early hours of Saturday morning, and the move towards to north of the Brisbane CBD as we get through to midday on Saturday. The wind, rainfall, storm surge and flood risks remain, and we are expecting those hazards to continue to develop as the system approaches. We're particularly concerned about the flood risk, and that risk extends beyond the cyclone crossing. So the rainfall and that riverine flooding will extend through the weekend and into early next week. Again, the movement of the system will be complex as it interacts with the islands and the mainland. The Bureau will continue to monitor the latest satellite and radar information and update those tropical cyclone warnings every hour. So I urge the community to stay up to date and monitor the latest cyclone track information via the Bureau's webpage or the Bureau's app, and those messages will be relayed obviously through the emergency services as well. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Matt. And can I start where you left off? This does remain a dynamic system. I am really pleased that the Bureau is moving to hourly updates. And as Matt has indicated, we do ask community members to keep themselves informed and to continue to check those updates and understand the risk, the timing and the nature of these continuing hazards. I'm really grateful for the way that people in southeast Queensland and in northern New South Wales have prepared themselves for these events. I want to thank the general community for their willingness to engage with emergency authorities in a responsible way and to take responsibility in particular for their own safety and the safety of their communities. I want to provide a brief update about the support that is being provided by the Albanese government to the governments of Premier Crisafulli and Premier Minns. I'll start with financial support. The Albanese government has agreed to jointly fund for both states a $50 million community relief fund that will provide councils with financial support to undertake essential, immediate clean-up and restoration activities after this event. And councils can use this funding for waste and debris removal from streets, properties and community assets, and to undertake activities to restore public assets. We want councils to go into this event knowing, fully confident, that they will have support to engage in the clean-up. That really helps as we move into the recovery phase. The second thing I wanted to speak about was the role of the ADF. I had the chance yesterday to visit Gallipoli Barracks and speak with some of the personnel there at Enoggera who are preparing themselves for their contribution. Yesterday we indicated that in response to a request from the Queensland Government, 60 personnel would be made available after the cyclone crosses the coast to undertake welfare checks. They'll be supported by high clearance vehicles to assist them in that work. And of course the Queensland Government has also requested aerial support for search and rescue activities, which are also being provided. This morning, the Prime Minister indicated that the ADF will provide 120 ADF personnel to augment and reinforce the New South Wales emergency services in their disaster preparedness and response activities in the Northern Rivers. They are moving to New South Wales immediately to provide support to the local SES in all of these activities, including conducting door knocking and welfare checks today on vulnerable members of the community. I want to conclude simply by thanking all of these personnel. I want to thank the ADF personnel. Many of them here in Brisbane, of course, have families of their own, homes of their own, and they are undertaking this work to support their communities. I say thank you to them. I also acknowledge the work of police, of emergency services, of the councils, of all of those utility workers, power, telco, water workers. Everything that you are doing to support your communities is so appreciated. And finally, I want to say to the community, look after yourselves, keep yourselves safe, maintain access to good sources of information and follow the instructions of authorities. Thank you.
Good morning. I'd like to start today by giving an operational update, and firstly to say that there have been no reported deaths or missing persons as a result of this event. We're starting to see a number of requests for assistance increase now, particularly across the Gold Coast and Redlands area, as a result of the intense wind and rainfall, and it started impacting particularly the coast. We have had reports of several large trees down, significant vegetation impacts, including erosion on the coastline, but pleasingly we've had no reports of inundation to properties at this stage. Since 6 p.m. last night, we've seen a large number of SES jobs. Most of these jobs were for tarping requests for leaky roofs, trees down, calls for assistance. There's been 11 search and rescues since yesterday, including response to swimmers, kayakers, jet ski riders, all caught up in the rough conditions. And can I please say, now's not the time to be in the surf, and all you're doing is putting emergency services now at risk and yourself at risk by undertaking that behaviour. We have seen a number of trees damaging houses and cars on the Gold Coast, and a number of near misses to which emergency services have responded, and fortunately there haven't been any major injuries, just a few minor injuries. We are now preparing for the flash flooding and heavy riverine flooding that we've heard the bomb speak about. We will see impacts throughout the day to local roads, so please do not drive through floodwaters. If you do have to be on the roads, plan your routes and please understand your risk. While our emergency services will continue to respond to these issues, we are preparing for that flash and major riverine flooding. Councils have their flood maps available on their dashboards, so please make yourself aware of that and have a plan in place. If you know you have to leave, prepare for that, understand when you have to leave and where you're going to go if you are in those flood impact zones. We also, today, while it's safe to do so, still have emergency services out, door knocking, for those at-risk residents in those flood zones. So if emergency services come to your door to provide you advice, please listen to that advice, have a plan in place, understand that if you are going to leave, when are you going to leave, where are you going to go? And finally, now is not the time to be undertaking sightseeing, particularly on the Gold Coast, and participating in that at-risk behaviour. Please stay safe. Thank you.
Good morning. The Queensland Fire Department staff and volunteers are very well prepared for the impacts of Tropical Cyclone Alfred. Up until 9:30 this morning, QFDs responded to 60 incidents related to the TC Alfred, with no water rescues or evacuations currently required. However, we had a rescue this morning in the Currumbin Valley, where Queensland Fire and Rescue firefighters responded to 2 people trapped in a bedroom after a large tree collapsed on a house in the Currumbin Valley. Early this morning this occurred. Firefighters used saws to rescue those 2 people, and they were handed over to QAS, where I'm very pleased to indicate that they only had relatively minor injuries. QFD crews continue to respond where it is safe to do so, and will continue through the event to do that. It's important that community limits their travel to essential travel in order to allow emergency services and other essential services to be able to move around the impacted areas. More than 180 specialist swiftwater rescue firefighters remain in place across the impacted zones, backed up by more than 50 locations where initial response to swiftwater incidents can be responded to. The department also has an additional 300 odd personnel engaged to support this event and dedicated to it. We've also provided additional firefighters onto our island communities across Bribie, North Stradbroke and Coochie Mudlow. Fire and rescue crews do remain ready and able to respond to any other types of calls that may come in through this event. An immense amount of planning and preparation has been put in place to support community recovery across washouts, damage assessments and debris cleanup. And that work and that preparation will bode well for post-crossing. Can I urge all residents to not become complacent, stay informed, heed and act on advice and guidance provided by authorities, and please also never drive, walk or play in floodwater. Thank you.
Good morning. The Queensland State Emergency Service has moved from the preparation activities supporting Queenslanders to the response phase in the last 24 hours. In the last 24 hours, there's been over 1,300 requests for SES assistance. Yesterday, they were largely in terms of preparation, assistance with sandbagging and so on. From last night, this morning, it is now emergency assistance, particularly for fallen trees, where access has been restricted by vegetation and where there's been structural issues in homes, particularly leaky roofs and broken windows and so on. In terms of the sandbags, as of last night, the SES has facilitated the distribution of over 1 million sandbags to local governments here across the region. And we have more in reserve ready if there are further requirements after the cyclone passes. In terms of the response activity, as I say, our teams have been pre-positioned and they're now busy with the response. This morning, for example, SES worked with Queensland Ambulance Service where a large 20-metre tree had come down on a house with an elderly resident injured. SES cleared access to allow QAS to enter the property and evacuate that elderly injured person, and it's an example of how our emergency services are prepared and cooperating to support Queenslanders in need. So just on that message, now's the time, particularly with the high wind, to be looking after yourself, look after your family, check on your neighbours. If you need SES assistance, you can download the SES Assistance app or call 132 500, 132 500. But always, if it's a life-threatening situation, call 000 for immediate emergency support.
Morning. We've currently got 40,000 services out of electricity in Gold Coast and Redlands, 35,000 in the Gold Coast and 5,000 in Redlands and the islands. We've been actively responding to the network outages since yesterday. Staff had to demobilise at 10 o'clock last night because of the wind strength. It was just too much. It was unsafe. We'll remobilise hopefully later today, depending on the wind strength across all the impacted areas. And we'll continue to do so. There's 1,200 staff available, as the Premier mentioned, and as we need more staff, Ergon staff, once we know we complete the full damage assessment, likely tomorrow into early Sunday, we'll also bring those 800 in if we need them. So we have enough resources, both people and equipment. It's just a matter of doing the damage assessments. Could I leave with two safety messages? The first is we've got hundreds of lines down across the network. Assume they're all live, don't go anywhere near them. The second message is with generators. History tells us that people bring generators inside into their garage in these events, and in Tropical Cyclone Yazi, sadly we had a loss of life due to a genset. People just don't know, so you don't bring them inside. So if you could take those two messages away, I'd be most grateful. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Premier, when will it be unsafe for people to be outside?
We'll keep giving the information as it comes to hand. And I mentioned that different areas will be subject to different challenges at different times. So for those people who were overnight on the Gold Coast, there was some huge erosion, some big winds. In many parts further north, that wasn't the case. And as the system moves closer, there's the prospect that their winds will pick up for Brizzy and the sunny coast. And then it moves on to the next challenge, which will be rainfall, and there'll be different areas that get rainfall impact at a different time, and that can lead to the potential for flooding. The most important thing people can do is just keep connected, just stay up to date with your information. And if you do that, you will be able to respond to whatever those challenges are in your circumstances in real time. And that's why the Bureau of Meteorology going to early updates is really important, so people can see the track of the system, but also what some of those rainfall totals look like, particularly in those key catchments as it relates to your part of the world.
Premier, former Labor Treasurer Wayne Shawn today said the immediate threat to referendum might no longer be there. What are his comments as to
it's during a disaster time. We need clear messaging. I'm not going to comment on that, other than to say the system is a large system, and it has the potential for heavy rainfall, and therefore there's the challenge of flooding. And it's important that people do all they can. And I make the observation, I think the way that people have handled this across the board has been remarkable. Yes, there's been images of a handful of people not doing the right thing, but don't let that cloud the fact that so many people have gone above and beyond to serve their community, to be good citizens in the neighbourhood. Some of the images that you've seen have made you proud to be a Queenslander, and I just think that events like this can bring out the best in people, and I'd rather focus on that.
What's your message to the people, especially on the Gold Coast, still going out and having a look at the beaches?
Yeah. I don't understand why anyone would want to be in the surf in weather like this. And if you don't value your own self-preservation, value the self-preservation of the person who'll have to go and rescue you, and your family member who'll have to get a knock on the door to advise them of the horrendous news of what's happened to you. But again, that is a minority. That is a minority. The majority of people have responded brilliantly, and what our role is to make sure that we give the information clearly and calmly and in real time, and the majority of people will heed that warning. And the warning's clear. It's putting yourself in a hazardous situation, being in the surf on the coast is not a smart option at the moment.
The 2019 North Queensland monsoon, which was very disruptive, that was also a slow-moving system.
Yeah.
Could we see a repeat with stuff on Alfred?
Well, you mentioned 2019. We also saw Jasper, which, if a system sits and can produce heavy rainfall, that's always a challenge. Dealing with flood is not something that Queenslanders are immune to, but it's certainly not something that Queenslanders fear. They deal with it brilliantly, and provided we give the information to them and show them those rainfall totals and continue to take them into our trust, people will handle that. But we've spoken a lot about storm tide, and what happened overnight was brilliant news about the fact that those storm surges didn't eventuate as the system got closer. We've got a high tide today, and then we've got another one tomorrow morning, 3:30, 4 o'clock on the coast. And there's a challenge as the system gets closer. But as Matt outlined, the potential for storm surge, those higher end ones have come down a little bit on the Bureau's prediction. But there's also river flooding and creek flooding that comes with big rainfall amounts. And that is the challenge for a really large part of the population across a pretty large area. And because the system is so large and because it's slow moving, of course that provides a challenge. Plan for the worst and let's see what gets delivered. But in the end, if we stay connected, if we keep our wits about us, you don't leave the house when you don't have to, if you don't drive on roads when they're flooded, I've got every confidence people will be fine.
Premier, we've seen a pretty mass evac in the northern rivers of New South Wales. Yes. Premier then saying, we've only got so many boats. In the event we do see some sort of mass inundation, particularly on the Gold Coast, are you confident you've got that capacity to conduct those mass rescues?
Good question, Alex. We pre-positioned a lot of assets for that. I spoke to you 3 days ago and said to you that we'd put a lot of people in the coast and in Redlands, and it turned out to be the right location. The benefit of doing that is to make sure that if you do have to respond in an emergency, that it's there. But we've also given that advice to people to know their situation, and on the back of it, we have every confidence that the individual will also handle themselves as they need to. You mentioned the northern part of New South Wales. I've spoken to Premier Minns every day. I'm just talking to him a moment ago, and I can assure you, whilst they mightn't be Queenslanders, they're in our thoughts. And I particularly think of the people of Lismore. They've been through some pretty tough times.
Premier, wonderful news about the twins. But what's the advice for parents with newborns that are formula fed and are feeling anxious about water supply?
Yeah, well, so I'll address that in two parts. The first is the good news. The fact that you can have a little glimmer of good news in events like this is always something you have to celebrate. I'm sure that the people of Australia will celebrate that, and I'm sure the fact that there's a set of healthy twins that so far so good is great, and it's something that we should all point to and be happy about. I know that a lot of parents have done the preparatory work and got formula where they need to. We'll do everything we can to give the information to keep the supermarkets open for as long as possible, but more importantly that we get them back on their feet as quickly as possible. Regarding water, and I know that's a big issue, particularly for young mums, we have done a lot of work to make sure that those water treatment plants are in the best position to continue to supply water. And I think people should be pretty confident that water supply, we've taken it very, very seriously, and I'm very confident that we'll be okay.
Do you have any information about dam raises in the Premier?
I believe that SEQ Water is standing up at 1:30 today, and again, that's important that that's communicated to people in real time.
In the instance we do run out of water, what should parents do?
Well, I'm confident that people have put in place the steps they need, and I know people have gone to a lot of focus in making sure that they've got bottled water, and I know that you'll have a real community of interest with neighbours helping neighbours, but from our end of the bargain, we are very confident at working with local government that we will be able to keep the continuity of water supply for as long as possible. And we've done a lot of work with some of those councils involved, with the likes of the water providers, the third-party water providers, and I'm very confident that the work that has been put in place will ensure that those essential services continue, including power. And the sooner we can reconnect that, the better.
You described the cyclone's movements as erratic. What's the likelihood we wake up tomorrow morning and it's still not here and it's so further?
When we look at cyclone track forecasting, we use a huge number of modelling outputs, and we analyse those as well as the satellite pictures and the radar imagery. Now, there will still be sort of erratic movement as the system approaches the coast, and that is almost true of all cyclones. As they interact with the coastal boundary, there is usually sort of slow movement or movement north or south of the track, as Alfred has done over the past few days. But that modelling work all shows the system continuing to move west, and our track at the moment follows the consensus or the sort of average of those model outputs. So that is the best information. We're updating it every hour.
Is Alfred's projected rainfall similar, daily rainfall, similar to that of what we saw in the Brisbane 2022 floods?
Very difficult to say and compare one event to the other. This event, obviously a tropical cyclone, it has got that tropical moisture component. What we saw in 2022 was days and days of feeding in sort of tropical moisture across a very sort of focused area for the Brisbane River. In this event, we are expecting the potential totals of up to 800 millimetres. I don't know the exact numbers off the top of my head, but they are higher than that, what we saw in 2022. So for this event, let's stay up to date with the latest information. Like I said, we are expecting those very high rainfall totals, and flood watches have been current for the Brisbane River as well for the last several days. So we're alerting the potential for minor to major flooding across those areas. And as we move through today and we see that the forecast develop and the rainfall actually fall, those watches will be updated to warnings. So again, I urge the public to stay up to date as that evolves.
Sorry, just to clarify, so you're saying that we could see totals larger than that of the Brisbane 2022?
No, I said my understanding I don't have the exact numbers, is the 2022 figures were higher than 800 millimetres over the sort of 2 or 3 days of this event, right? We may see some spot values in this event that are higher than 800, but I don't expect them to be as high as what we saw in 2022. But I'll reiterate, let's stay tuned, let's watch this thing evolve, because it is a tropical system and we will see some very high rainfall figures and flooding.
Thank you very much.